Aitah for telling my mom I won't be my half-sibling's guardian if something happens to her and her husband before they turn 18. It'll make the beginning very intriguing, like a Reddit confession with slow burn tension and betrayal underneath. Let's begin. Part I, the promise I refused to make when my mom asked to meet just for coffee. I didn't think it would end with her crying in the middle of a crowded cough, whispering, "How could you say that to me?" I didn't raise my voice. I didn't insult her. All I said was, "Mom, if something happens to you and Dan, I can't take your kids. I'm sorry." The words hung between us like smoke. She looked at me as if I'd confessed to a crime. But what I didn't tell her, what I couldn't, was that I'd already raised one child in that house, me, and I'd barely survived it. My name's Alex. I'm 27. My mom had me when she was 19, a scared, exhausted single mother in a small town. I grew up watching her work double shifts, chase rent, and promise that things will get better soon. When she met Dan, I was 16. He was charming, older, with a steady job. They got married a year later, and I thought, finally, maybe she'll be happy now. But happiness came with conditions. Dan didn't like attitude. He didn't like when I stayed out late or when I talked back. He especially didn't like when my real dad tried to contact me. Within months, the house stopped feeling like home. Every smile had a warning behind it, and every dinner ended with someone walking out, usually me. By the time I left for college, my mom had 2 new kids, my half-siblings, Max and Lily. I loved them, still do, but visiting that house meant stepping back into the past I'd escaped. So when my mom sat me down 10 years later and said, "We've been thinking about making you their legal guardian just in case something happens," I froze. She said it so casually, like she was asking me to water her plants if they went on vacation. I tried to explain, "Mom, I can't raise them. I live in a 1-bedroom apartment. My job barely covers rent." She waved it off. "You'll be fine. You've always been responsible. Besides, you owe them. They adore you." That word, "oh," hit like a slap. I didn't owe her kids anything, not after what I'd been through in that house. I still remember the night that made me leave for good. Dan had accused me of stealing money from his wallet. $20 that had fallen behind the couch. He shouted until my mom stepped in, shaking, saying, "Just give it back, Alex. Even if you didn't take it, please." And I did, because I couldn't stand to see her cry. That was the night I realized she would always choose peace over truth, even if that meant sacrificing me for it. So now, years later, when she looked at me across that coffee table, eyes full of disappointment, voice trembling, I wanted to say, "You chose him over me once. Why should I trust you not to do it again, even after you're gone?" But I didn't. I just said, "I'm sorry." She left soon after, muttering something about how family doesn't turn their back on family. I thought that would be the end of it. It wasn't. A week later, I got a message from my half-sister Lily. She's 12. Sweet, sensitive, the kind of kid who still draws hearts in her text messages. "Why don't you want to take care of us if Mom dies?" My heart sank. She shouldn't even know about that conversation. I called my mom immediately. She didn't pick up. When she finally texted back, all she said was, "They deserve to know who you really are." That was the moment something inside me broke. Because she didn't just guilt me. She turned her own kids against me. And for what? For refusing to repeat her mistakes. Still, something about the whole thing didn't sit right. My mom was emotional, sure, but this felt intentional, calculated. Then I learned why. A week later, I got a call from Dan's sister, someone I hadn't spoken to in years. She said, "Alex, you need to know something. Your mom and Dan are updating their will. If you refuse guardianship, the kids go to his brother, the one who lives 3 states away, the one under investigation for neglect." My stomach turned cold. So that was it. She wasn't asking. She was cornering me. If I said yes, I'd be the backup plan. If I said no, she'd make me the villain who abandoned my siblings. And either way, she'd protect him, the man who made my teenage years a cage. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, staring at the family photo she'd sent me last Christmas. Mom, smiling. Dan, stiff and proud. Max and Lily, laughing in matching sweaters. They looked like a perfect family, but I knew better. I saw what wasn't in the photo. The fear in her eyes when Dan raised his voice. The quiet apologies that came after every bad day. The way she always said, "He's under stress," The same line she used for 20 years, no matter what he did. And suddenly I realized something. She wasn't just asking me to protect the kids. She was asking me to protect her choice. The choice to stay with a man who made everyone around him smaller. So, am I the asshole for saying no? Maybe. But I also know this. If something ever happened to her and Dan and those kids came to me, I'd help them, feed them, clothe them, love them if I could. But I wouldn't promise to raise them, because promises made in fear always turn into prisons. And I've already spent too many years locked inside one. Part E. The secrets they hid the week after the confrontation at the car. The tension at home became unbearable. I avoided my mom's calls, ignored the texts, and barely looked at my half-siblings' messages. But every time I did, a tiny knot of guilt twisted in my stomach. I couldn't help it, even if I didn't want legal responsibility. They were still my family. Max and Lily were still my siblings. Then came the first real shock. Dan's sister, Marcy, called me late one evening. Her voice was shaky, almost afraid. "Alex, I'm telling you this because no one else will," she said. "You don't understand what's happening in that house. Your mom and Dan, they've been hiding things. Dangerous things." "Dangerous? What do you mean?" Marcy sighed. "I mean things that could ruin the kids' lives if they end up with the wrong person. I tried to warn your mom years ago, but she just shut me out." I felt my pulse spike. "Marcy, tell me exactly what you know." She hesitated. Then, slowly, "Dan isn't who you think he is. Has not just controlling, has involved in some shady business. Unreported income, threats to people who ask questions, even things that could involve the kids if you're not careful. And your mom has been covering for him, always, even when it hurt you." My hands shook as I processed it. All those years I'd blamed her for staying, for choosing him, but I hadn't realized how much she was protecting her family, and how dangerous that protection had become. "And this affects me how?" I asked, my voice tight. "Because if something happens to your mom and Dan, whether accident or worse, the kids could be left in the hands of someone who might exploit them. And the courts, they don't care about law, they care about proof. And your mom has no plan beyond putting you in the middle." The words hit me like a punch. I spent the next few days secretly investigating. I had to know. I had to see the truth for myself. First, I checked Dan's financial history. Hidden transfers, off-the-books accounts, receipts that didn't match his job description. Then I talked to neighbors, old friends of Dan's who had drifted away over the years. Some spoke in hushed tones, afraid to say anything to loud. One former co-worker mentioned a business deal that had gone wrong and someone had disappeared. No charges, no follow-up. The more I discovered, the sicker I felt. My mom had known about some of this. She had always known. And she had shielded me, and the kids, from the full truth. One night, I confronted her in the kitchen. She was making tea, moving as if nothing had changed. "Mom," I said, "why didn't you tell me about Dan?" She looked at me, eyes weary but firm. "I did what I thought was right." "Right?" I laughed bitterly. "Do you even realize what could happen to Max and Lily if something happens to you? If I refuse to be their guardian, you'd leave them at the mercy of him." Her face flinched, just slightly, but enough. "I know," she said softly. "I know I've made mistakes, but I thought I was keeping you safe from the burden." "Safe?" I yelled, the words echoing off the walls. "You've been protecting him, not us. You've been covering his tracks for years." She dropped her gaze. "Yes, I've been protecting him, but also protecting you from knowing the truth too soon. You were a child. You weren't ready." I realized then that this wasn't just about me refusing guardianship. It was about truth and deception in layers. About my mom trying to survive a marriage with a man who could harm her and her kids, and still wanting to shield me from the danger until I was ready. But I wasn't ready either. The next day, Marcy sent me an email with scanned documents, proof of Dan's dealings. Letters from anonymous complaints, reports that hinted at threats to people who got too close. I couldn't ignore it anymore. I couldn't just refuse guardianship without knowing what I might be refusing. I started speaking to lawyers about a contingency plan, not because I wanted responsibility, but because I had to protect the kids from being left vulnerable. And then the real betrayal hit. One evening, I received a text from Lily. "Alex, Mom said you don't love us. She says you don't want to take care of us. Is it true?" Her words tore me apart. My mom had spun my refusal into a narrative to the kids. They already loved me, trusted me, and now she had poisoned their perception of me to protect her own decisions. It was clever, but cruel. I realized something essential that night. This wasn't just about guardianship. It was about control, fear, and survival. My mom was terrified of losing her children to Dan. Even after years of abuse, Dan's shadow loomed over her every decision, and in trying to protect them all, she had unknowingly made me the villain in their eyes. The turning point came 2 weeks later. I received an anonymous tip, someone claiming to have evidence of Dan's most serious wrongdoing. If I took the kids under any legal guardianship, this person warned, I could inadvertently be dragged into his criminal web. The more I learned, the more impossible it became to just say yes or no. I couldn't be a guardian in the traditional sense, but I also couldn't walk away entirely. I realized that guardianship might not mean custody. It might mean vigilance. So I made my choice. I told my mom, I can't promise to be their legal guardian. I can't raise them in my home, but I will protect them in every way I can. From Dan, from danger, from anything that could harm them. I'll be there for them, just not in the way you want. She cried. I cried. And for the first time in years, we stopped arguing. Because this wasn't a simple fight. It was survival. It was love. And it was betrayal. But also honesty. Months later, I still monitor the house from a distance. I check in on Max and Lily quietly, making sure no threats reach them. I'm not their guardian on paper, but in every way that matters, I am. And maybe that's what it really means to love someone, to be willing to protect them, even when it hurts, even when the world thinks you're wrong. Part E. The web of secrets. Weeks passed in tense quiet. I stopped going to the cough, stopped answering my mom's texts right away. Every day, I worked to piece together the truth about Dan, the man who had haunted my childhood and now threatened my half-siblings. Marcy had given me fragments, bank records, witness statements, even a report from a former employee who had quit under suspicious circumstances. But none of it painted the full picture. I needed everything. One evening, I broke into Dan's old office at his small business under the guise of returning a forgotten document. It was risky, illegal even, but I couldn't sit and do nothing while Max and Lily's future dangled over a man who could ruin them. Inside, the office smelled faintly of stale coffee and cigarette smoke. Papers were scattered across the desk, but I noticed a filing cabinet that seemed out of place. A safe built into the wall. I spent hours trying to crack it, using my phone's flashlight and patience. When it finally opened, the documents inside made my blood run cold. Contracts that didn't make sense at first glance, custody agreements, trusts, and a series of letters to anonymous accounts. Some files referenced potential heirs and included Max and Lily's full legal information, and one document, handwritten and dated last month, said, in the event of a catastrophe, transfer control of assets and dependents to trusted family. Alex Rivers not to be trusted. He had specifically tried to block me. I left the office that night with a box of documents and a resolve that felt heavier than any burden I'd carried before. I realized that guardianship wasn't a choice anymore. It was a battlefield. The next day, I confronted my mom. I know everything, I said, pushing the files across the kitchen table. She flinched but didn't deny it. I didn't want you involved, she whispered. I wanted to keep the kids safe, Alex. I made mistakes. Safe, I asked. You let them live under the shadow of a man who could ruin their lives, and tried to guilt me into custody. Her hands shook. I did it to protect them. As dangerous. I was afraid if you knew the full extent, you'd leave them too. And I realized every word, every manipulation, every tear she shed, it wasn't just about control. It was fear. Fear for the children, fear of Dan, and fear that I'd finally see the truth and walk away forever. I decided then that I couldn't rely on my mom to act rationally. I would protect Max and Lily myself. I started by quietly alerting the proper authorities, not just child services, but financial regulators and local law enforcement about Dan's off-the-books accounts and questionable business practices. The threads were complicated. It took weeks of digging, calling former employees, and careful documentation. I had to make sure that when action was taken, the kids were already safe and I had proof to shield my mom from legal fallout. During this process, I also reached out to Lily privately. I know what's happening, and I'm going to keep you and Max safe. I'm not abandoning you. Her reply came hours later. I thought you didn't care about us. I'm scared. My chest tightened. The betrayal had already happened. through my mother's fear-driven manipulation, and it was breaking their trust in me. I had to rebuild it slowly. Then came the night that changed everything. I received an anonymous tip. Dan was planning to move assets and potentially flee out of state. I called my mom, and for the first time, we acted together. We went to the house late at night and removed all critical documents, transferred passwords, and moved anything that could give Dan leverage into a secure storage facility. He noticed immediately. The next morning, he confronted my mom in the driveway, shouting, demanding to know who had touched his stuff. I stepped in. Dan, stay away from my siblings. I don't care what you think. You have no right to involve them in your schemes anymore. His eyes narrowed. You think you can protect them? You're a child yourself. I realized then that he truly believed he was untouchable, and that made him dangerous. Over the next few weeks, Dan's threat escalated. Anonymous calls, menacing emails, shadowy figures showing up near the kids' school. I even caught a neighbor mentioning seeing him parked outside late at night. I knew that guardianship in name was still dangerous, but vigilance could save them. I became almost invisible in their lives. The uncle figure who acted when needed but stayed in the shadows to prevent escalation. And slowly, the children started to trust me again. Max confided small things about school. His anxiety. Lily asked me to help with homework, sometimes staying a little longer in my apartment after school. They didn't know the full story. I wasn't ready for them to know. Finally, the authorities acted. Dan was investigated for financial crimes, his business shut down temporarily, and his access to the children was heavily restricted. I watched from the background as my mother tried to regain some dignity, apologizing quietly to the kids for the confusion, explaining that she'd been scared and made mistakes. Max and Lily forgave her, but they also looked at me differently. As someone who wasn't just family by blood, but family by choice. Sitting alone one night after everything calmed down, I realized something. Guardianship on paper had never been my duty. Protection, vigilance, and emotional honesty. That had been my real responsibility all along. I didn't owe them the house or the full burden or a title. I owed them safety, love, and someone who would act when others couldn't. And for the first time, I felt at peace with my decision.